Welcome to the Porn Reboot podcast, where you get practical tips to gaining control over your porn or sex addiction. We help ambitious men end their out-of-control sexual behavior with pornography, sex, and masturbation so that you can maximize your life, perform at your potential, and remain in control in the driver's seat, which is where you have to be in order to gain or maintain the success you want in life. I'm your host, J.K. Emezi, certified sex and porn addiction recovery coach. Welcome to the episode.
Do you sometimes suspect that the cause of your out-of-control behavior is completely unknown? Do you feel that you've actually put in the work, put pen to paper, and really become clear about the habitual behaviors, the lack of self-care, the bad habits, the lack of boundaries that cause you to view pornography? And do you feel that despite doing all that work, there's still something deep within you that just overtakes you, possesses you, and causes you to slip and relapse? If so, today we're going to talk about, I'll call it, that which we cannot see. Now, this is not a planned podcast episode. I don't have notes or anything. This is a stream of consciousness podcast from some notes from sessions I've had with clients. I do believe that there are some men, and this is something I've noticed over the years, who get to the later stages of their reboots, the maintenance stage, and they find that they're stuck. They've made a lot of improvement in their lifestyle. They have great habits, but their self-image cannot change. And there's often some sort of block in the way. It's very easy to assume that it's some sort of trauma, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's an issue that they feel like they're so close to figuring it out, but they can't quite put their finger on it. So today I'm just going to share my thoughts on this, and hopefully if you're listening to this and if you're at that stage, this might help shift something for you and hopefully perhaps point you in the direction of resolving this for yourself. And I also just want to mention that within the program, we have Dr. Rankin, Coach Milan, and Dr. Eastman, who can help you with some of these blockages that I call them blockages. That's a funny word to use. We'll just call them blocks when it comes to your reboots. Before that, I think it's helpful to differentiate between two terms: suppression and repression, and the unconscious and the subconscious mind. And I think the difference between these things are subtle, mainly because they're also connected. So let's talk about suppression versus repression. When you suppress a desire or an impulse, sexual or otherwise, what you're doing is that you are pushing it down far below your level of awareness. A very typical example would be you were trained by society, culture, and religion to be monogamous, and you were told things like having sex with somebody that you are not married to is quote-unquote casual. And even if you're not married to the person, if you're not planning on being in a serious relationship, whatever that means, I guess that means a serious relationship being a relationship that will lead to long-term monogamy, then you are doing something bad or you're taking advantage of the woman. This doesn't change the very real impulse or desire that you feel for engaging in this behavior and connecting with women. But in order to be societally appropriate, you decide that you don't want this in your awareness anymore because it's coming in conflict with your societal programming. So you force it down. Now, let's say you become more religious as you grow up. Let's say that you become more conservative and start spending time in social circles and places, or you get a career, move into a neighborhood, become parts of circles where this is very important. Now, this thought, this impulse or desire becomes way too endangering for you to admit. So you push it down even further. So you push it down to a point that it's no longer recognizable. You can't even identify what it originally was. And that is where the process of repression takes place. So suppression is where you are consciously pushing it down, and repression begins involuntarily, the moment that you push it down and it becomes something, you push it so deep that you can no longer recognize it. Now, brother, I'd like you to take a moment, seriously, take a moment and think of some impulses or desires that you've had. This could be pornographic in nature. Like, think of that type of porn you watch that you're like, man, I definitely delete my browser history and clean everything after watching this type of porn, because if I was busted watching this would be a big deal. Take a moment to think of how and why you suppressed it. Like, did you push it down so much that it became unrecognizable? Because some brothers will show up and tell me, hey, JK, I've been watching this type of pornography and I don't know why. It's screwing me over. It's messing with my head. Often, that came from a suppressed impulse or desire, which you didn't deal with, which you couldn't speak to anybody about because your society, culture, or religion didn't allow you to. Understand, first of all, that is a self-protective mechanism. And sometimes this happens when you are very young. You build up that habit of doing that. Also, remember that we as human beings are programmed for survival. And that means that our mind will protect us. It will remove or attempt to remove in any way possible from our consciousness anything that it experiences as a threat, a physical, mental, or emotional threat. Unfortunately, this protective mechanism has a price, and that price is a price that you pay later on in life. Pornography plays a role in this because, unfortunately, due to the anonymous nature of it, due to the fact that you can engage in it for a long period of time, and also due to the fact that there are no visible external signs except to an expert that you have a problem with pornography, you will often engage in it. And this is the place where a lot of your repression, so to speak, is expressed. So don't be so confused when you find yourself drifting to very, very taboo material. And pornography plays a role in this because once you've gotten used to the vanilla pornography and you need more taboo, more disturbing, more violent, more rough types of pornography to release adrenaline and dopamine, your mind begins to search for things within its frame of reference that it can consider to be shocking. But it has to make sure that you consider it to be shocking. All of this is happening unconsciously. And then what does it do? As it goes through your archives, as it goes through your file folders, so to speak, it starts finding these things that were repressed. And it's going through them. It's like, can we take this and throw it into the stew, into the soup that is your arousal template? Can we throw it in here? And you're viewing pornography, interfacing with the pornography, quickly opening tabs, looking at different genres, scrolling through different things. Your brain is moving so fast as it looks at those little thumbnails, seeking something that it can associate with it. You're doing a lot of work. That's a lot of brain power. And eventually it begins to find things that it can associate with pornography. So again, all those unacceptable ideas, those wishes, those desires, yes, even some traumatic memories, some painful emotions are going to be brought out and played in the theater of your fantasy with pornography. And you have no idea why you're doing it because you are not necessarily reliving that traumatic experience. You're not necessarily interfacing with that unacceptable idea. Your mind just took the concept of it, which was a very real experience to you that you couldn't deal with it, so you pushed it down, and it throws it into pornography. It finds the scene, and for some reason, you don't know why, but you already know that this is doing something for you, and then you masturbate to it. Now, once you're done masturbating to it, because that was an entirely unconscious experience, you now have these strong emotions that come up. And sometimes, in the days after, you experience other emotions. One of the more common ones is shame. The shame doesn't just come up because, I watch pornography. The shame comes up because you have viewed something that was an unacceptable idea or a behavior that you had previously suppressed, and you feel that you have done a quote-unquote bad thing. When your therapist is working with you to help you end your out-of-control behavior, they have to address this. They have to simultaneously address where is the shame actually coming from if you're going to work with a therapist. Now, when you try to end your behavior on your own and you try to bring these things into consciousness, if you do not develop the coping strategies to handle them as they come up, if you do not have the community and the support to support you as these strong emotions come up, you're not going to be able to assure yourself that as an adult, you have the resources to handle these things because they're so overwhelming to you. I mean, come on. The shame is so overwhelming that you haven't even reached out for help. That's the reason why people cancel their calls. That's the reason why people change their mind. They think they made a logical, rational decision. They really think they did. But what they don't realize is at the last moment, at the very last moment, your unconscious mind sabotages you. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And brothers, excuse me if I don't know, because like I said, this is stream of consciousness. I'm just sharing from the top of my head and from the notes that I took from some of the brothers I've spoken about, how I feel about this and my view as a professional reboot coach using the porn reboot system as to how this stuff manifests in our lives. So I hope this is helpful and making sense to you. I'll give you an example. There are some people who deal with anxiety, and perhaps your therapist said that you have an anxiety disorder. Oftentimes, this is the influence of your unconscious mind. It has somehow handicapped you. You don't know why you're experiencing the anxiety, but what has happened is that by viewing pornography or engaging in some other behavior, your unconscious mind, while you were viewing pornography, slowly started bringing up those issues. And after that, after you'd masturbated, after you'd come back to your senses, you started experiencing more anxiety. Do you experience more anxiety after you've slipped, like for the next few days? Interestingly enough, sometimes some other issue unrelated to pornography brought up those ideas. Maybe something in your life happened. Your partner is about to break up with you. You got into a fight with somebody. You have some financial issues. You lost a lot of money. Anything could have happened that triggered one of these suppressed ideas or emotions. And then you ended up using pornography to try and feel better about that. And you thought it was going to help you, but actually it's only magnifying the issue. It's only making it worse. So all you get from pornography is the orgasm in that moment. But what it does is that it messes up those files in your mind. It brings all the crap up. And then you have to deal with the consequences in things like anxiety or panic attacks or whatever else it might be that affects you later on. This is your body's way, your body and your mind's way of dealing with it. It's just overwhelming. It's right there below the surface, bubbling. And too many of you wait till you hit what traditional recoveryists call rock bottom before you reach out. Rock bottom meaning when everything comes to the surface. And then you start acting crazy. Not that you're acting crazy, but you are letting go of your responsibilities. You are non-functional. You are self-sabotaging all over the place. You are highly emotional. And then you start reaching out for help when it's too late. So I hope this helps you understand that the difference between, or rather the connection between suppression and repression and how it impacts your behavior with pornography. Now let's talk about the unconscious and the subconscious mind. And I want to make it clear, even with the most current studies out there on the mind, there's still a lot of debate on the difference between the unconscious and the subconscious mind. There are a lot of people out there who use them interchangeably. I don't think it's that big a deal because we do understand that we're speaking about something that is not conscious. That's the one thing we can all agree on. I think when we think of the idea of suppression versus repression, the original definition that I gave you, I'll use an example. So your conscious awareness is like the tip of the iceberg. the things you can see. The fact that you are listening to this podcast because you know you have a problem with pornography, that's the tip of the iceberg. As to where the problem comes from, why you're dealing with it, and so on and so forth, that's within the unconscious and the subconscious. It is further than the eye can see. You cannot see the huge mass within the water. Now, you can start working on it yourself, but the reason that it's recommended that you work with professionals is because they can help you handle that mass. Some of you are unaware of how huge the unconscious and subconscious is. Some of you are starting to get an idea when you realize how difficult it seems to overcome this behavior. You're trying to use your conscious mind and willpower to overcome this. But your willpower is like the Titanic against an iceberg. It's not going to work in the long run. I think the easy way to explain the difference between the subconscious and the unconscious is to talk about how inaccessible both of them are. Well, one of them is accessible and one of them is inaccessible. So for example, if you spend some time thinking, introspecting, even meditating, you'll come to find that you feel certain emotions. So let's say you feel irritation towards somebody, but you don't know why you feel that irritation. And so you spend some time to sit down, journal, write out the feelings, think about it, become introspective. And then you realize that this comes from the fact that you subconsciously don't like the fact that they talk too much because it reminds you of your ex who used to talk a lot or somebody you don't like from your past. Not the best example, but you get what I'm saying. The point remains that it wasn't conscious, but with a little bit of effort, you could access it, which means that it was subconscious. Let's talk about something that is unconscious. And I'll give you an example of something that's unconscious to me. I'll use myself as an example, and I had to work on this. I have an aversion to anything that is violent and rape related. Like even a rape scene or a forced scene on like TV will just bring up very strong emotions. Now, I don't know the exact reason why, because I'm still working through it, but I have a suspicion that, and I want to make one thing clear, when I was viewing pornography, I didn't have a problem with forced sex scenes because I believe a part of my mind knew that it was acted out for entertainment and it just didn't seem realistic to me. So it was a permittable fetish or fantasy, so to speak. I'd say a fantasy back when I had a problem with pornography, like 16 years back. However, when it was depicted in a movie or a series, it seemed very realistic to me and I had instant aversion towards it. And I also ended up having a lot of compassion for the person who was the victim. And it would carry on. Like I would keep thinking of all the unfortunate people. I would even go to the point of like looking up like charities and things that help women who had been sexually abused. And sometimes I used to think, oh, maybe it's because I feel guilt because I used to watch, like I used to have fantasies of that, which were brought up by pornography. But I came to find out that it wasn't. And what I suspect, and again, like I said, I'm still working on it, just being vulnerable with you guys for the sake of the podcast. I'm a guy who dealt with this behavior too and overcame it. Remember, my sisters, when I was growing up, were sexually abused. And I'll keep that for a story for another day. Or maybe I won't even share it on the podcast. This is something that some of the brothers in the intensive program know. So I think I'll keep that one off the podcast. It's for brothers who are like, we open up, I share a lot of my story, my personal story, things that happened to me. But that's for guys within the group. But either way, I'll share this much. My younger sisters were sexually abused, not by a family member, but by a neighbor while I was in the home. And I was unaware of it, mainly because I was distracted viewing pornography while it was happening. So as I slowly worked through this, I started to come to the realization that a lot of my aversion to that happening comes to me processing some of these things that happened to other people that I really cared for in my life. So again, that's the unconscious. That's not just subconscious. That's not something I can just think about and like introspect and figure it out. There are many layers of emotions that I have to peel back. And a lot of that was for many years, when I didn't have the coping strategies, when I was in my early 20s, I was just pushing those things deep down till they became repressed. And is it possible that repression of what happened turned into my fantasies with pornography? I believe there's a small chance that it is. But for the work that I've done on myself so far, there doesn't seem to be much of a connection. I just want to say, I'm saying this for you too, because that may be a similar situation that you're in. You could be able to relate to it. But my point remains that in order for you to reach your full potential in life, your full ability to connect with other people, to be the best version of yourself, you have to gain entry into a lot, not all, a lot of what exists below your conscious mind. And your behavior with pornography, believe it or not, is a blessing in disguise. It is the doorway. Your rebooting is the doorway into accessing your higher self. But many of you don't see it that way, and you spend your life running away from this again and again. Here's one thing that I've noticed too, and this is something brothers who are within our program can understand. When a man starts rebooting, changes his habits and his lifestyle, he starts winning in life, in many areas of his life. And as he begins to win, sometimes a lot of things from the subconscious mind begin to come up, because part of winning means taking risks, doing things that you never thought you could do, but now you're courageous enough to do them because you're in a community where you see other brothers doing it and you see nothing happens to them. And you know that to be a contributing member of this community of winners, you have to push yourself. So you're encouraged to do so, you're supported to do so, but each time you do so, you often have to face one of those strong emotions which lies below the surface, and it comes up. Unfortunately, when that comes up, you experience fear because you don't think you have the coping strategies to deal with it. The fear kicks in because you've stepped into a new self-image that you're not used to. And this triggers your fight or flight mechanism, which ironically could cause you to slip or relapse. So sometimes men will fall into a relapse when they step into a new self-image because it is very uncomfortable to sit in this new version of yourself. But this is where a lot of guys sabotage themselves. What makes rebooting different from recovery is that we are surrounded by successful men. We understand when this is happening to you. There are a lot of people who are stuck in their self-image. If you are in a group where men are not aiming very high and they're just aiming to be quote-unquote average, then you're not going to have the opportunity to step into that new self-image, because in order for you to step into that new self-image, you need to leave that 12-step group. You can't be hanging out with those people from church anymore. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just that for you to step into who you truly are, you need to step away temporarily, often, not all the time, from that group, because that group will pull you back down. The process of dealing with these things takes a lot of courage. One thing I want to tell you right now, as you listen to this, if you've listened to this episode this far, is that I am proud of you for being a brother who could hang with me for this long. And I want to remind you something that I learned from a mentor of mine, that good quality teaching comes in conflict with what you know in your worldview. This was very helpful to me. Anytime I heard somebody teaching something when I was seeking help, I was seeking answers, and that thing they were teaching came in conflict with the way I viewed the world, it often meant that it was something that was going to take work. It often meant that I was going to grow. So I want you to keep that in mind. That's what I have for you, brothers, when it comes to this today's evening stream of consciousness thoughts. The stream of consciousness thoughts is me basically dumping these ideas on you. But this is what we do within Porn Reboots. And you know what? I would love to hear from you guys. I really do. I respond to guys who listen to the podcast and share. Send an email to jkemezi@elevatedrecovery.org. Let's have a conversation. Or join our free Facebook group. It's a discreet private group. Share your ideas on the podcast episode. Just drop the number of the episode and tag me. We'll have a conversation. Thank you for listening.
I'm JK, your brother in this struggle. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Porn Reboot podcast. I'll speak to you later on in the week. If you found this episode helpful, here are 4 ways I can help you with your out-of-control sexual behavior for free. The first way is to grab a free copy of my book, Confessions of a Porn Addict, 7 Secrets of Porn-Free Men at elevatedrecovery.org, or visit the link in the description below this episode. The second way is, if you're not sure where to start, but you'd like to learn more about my team and I, if you'd like to spend time with like-minded professionals and business owners who are controlling their behavior, then join our free and confidential group, the Porn Reboot group on Facebook. There's a link to join in the description below this episode. The third way is if you need help right now because you have a burning issue, your behavior with pornography is hurting you mentally or emotionally, you're about to lose your relationship, you want to live up to your potential, be an authentic man, and free yourself from shame, guilt, and underachieving, then click on the link in the description below this episode that says free coaching call. And the fourth way is to leave us a 5-star review if you enjoy this podcast, so that we can reach more men who are struggling in silence and bring back the lessons we learn from coaching them to freedom.